Hi, John. Thank you so much for joining me in this podcast episode. Really appreciate it. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for inviting me along. I'm quite interested in what we're going to talk about. Conscious leadership.
Yeah,
I think that's the word for it. Conscious leadership. Yeah, should be a good chat.
yeah, definitely. Super excited to have a conversation with you. And yeah, before we get to the topic, I'd love to know more about you. Like, how you get involved in a like leadership world, like entrepreneurship. Is that something you always wanted to do, or like accidentally you become an entrepreneur?
I suppose it was sort of accidental. I'm from New Zealand, and in New
Okay.
Zealand, it's a country bigger than Britain. It's a huge country with 5 million population.
Mm,
There's uh, there's 5 million population. There's 15 million cattle. There's 30 million sheep and 90 million hectares of grapes for wine. So they've got them in the right balance.
yeah,
But what happens down there is because it's so far away, everybody wants to go there, but there's nobody there. Everybody that is there leaves. They do their OE, overseas experience.
hmm,
So I left there to do my overseas experience over 30 years ago. Um, and well, it wasn't entrepreneurial. There's a big wide world out here.
yeah,
And New Zealand's a long way away. It's a little wee small place, beautiful place, but not a lot happens down there. So that sort of started me on that track of sort of, well, if I'm not going to live in my home country, and I've lived in probably 10 years in France. I've lived in England. We're back in England now, but we lived here in the late 90s.
right.
I've lived in California, San Diego, Florida.
Okay.
I've just spent the last 10 years in Myanmar, in Burma, which was pretty amazing. Since the war, I lived there for the 10 years that they had what they call a democracy.
Right.
But we had to leave because of the coup that's going on down there. So we're back in England now. But it was always sort of I can either get jobs working for other people or I can, yeah, find something that works for me and being flexible, um, enjoying travel and
Yeah.
not travel on holiday. It's actually going to places and really working there, not what I call a Club Med tourist. A lot of people go overseas to Asia and they might have a 2 year sort of work visa or they get a 2 year sojourn with their company into Asia. So they have a bit of a holiday.
Yeah.
Um, and I run into so many people overseas that never really, when I'm overseas, that never really understand the culture, especially in Asia. It's incredible. In Myanmar was an amazing place.
Yeah.
It was up until before the First World War, it had the best universities in Asia. It supplied a third of the world's rice. It supplied 10% of the world's oil,
Oh, wow. Didn't know
pre-war.
that.
Um, Post-war, just in the late 40s, and that the,
Yeah.
the head of the UN was Burmese. It's massive impact on the world. And then Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore modeled Singapore on Burma at that stage.
Hmm.
And then in 62, the army stepped in and screwed it all up, and they sort of let them come out. It's now 12 years ago. And we arrived there, and it was a really incredibly exciting time to be there. We arrived there just before the first, what they called a democratic election. I mean, we wouldn't call it that, but they
Yeah.
did. Um, but it was almost like, the lights had been turned out and one day and the next day they got turned on. And being an ex-Commonwealth country, they still had a lot, and they probably wouldn't like me saying this, but they still had a lot of the awareness, the underlying um just the personalities that you could see that it was bubbling away, and of course it was off, and it was phenomenal for entrepreneurship and training and just I worked in one job. I was running a 6-star hotel on the river. We used to go to Mandalay, and I first worked onto the boat. It's 40 crew on the boat, 6-star. It was $400, $300 for the cheap room, so it wasn't cheap. So we didn't get many locals, lots of
Yeah.
Americans and Europeans. But anyway, the first thing I said to the three women on the front desk was the local Burmese women. I said, so my job is to teach you to take my job. And it took them about 2 days to even get that concept. No one had ever told them that before.
Yeah.
So just to that 10 years, just to open them up, to show them that, the only one stopping you is yourself.
Mm.
Um, and then work with them and in that country there was this incredible guy. I'll always remember him. He used to paint these really nice watercolor paintings of the temples and the scenery on the Mandalay and Bagan and that. And I started to recognize him because he'd turn up and he'd try and sell his paintings to the guests, which is, it's just cool. And then
Yeah.
we get down the river 40 miles and he'd turn up again. I'm like, what's going on? He said, I've got a motorbike. I just follow you guys up and down the river. Wow. So even with that background of being isolated since the 60s when the army took over into when I got there 12 years ago, even with all that suppression then, you open it up and people have got their entrepreneurial spirit and they took off. They just didn't have the technical skills, and that's what was so exciting, be able to share those technical skills with them down there.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, of course, the army stepped back in 18 months ago and pretty much took it back to the ice ages. So I think, yeah, there's hundreds of tourists going into the country now. It's an incredible, it's an amazing place. If it's Rudyard Kipling said, Burma is a place like you'll never know.
Mm,
And I mean, Kipling wrote that decades ago, but it's still the same today.
yeah.
But yeah, so that's sort of my background. I've had some different countries and world where I've worked, and I've had some really different understandings of what entrepreneurship is, different cultural experiences, and then landing there to be able to share those with a
Yeah.
population that holds the elderly and teachers in really high esteem. We don't do that in the West anymore, but in Myanmar they do, because the elderly have got all the knowledge,
Yeah.
and the teachers have got all the knowledge, and that's what they want, because they know that, to get out of where they're living, they need to learn to be able just to do things.
It's true.
So it was great. Not so much there being an entrepreneur, I did it a bit there, but it was more just bringing people up. So I talk a lot in networking events, um, different events that are going on there, because the education system's appalling.
Yeah.
So that was really exciting. And then the leadership sort of stuff, it's really, really, really basic leadership. It's very well, it's a patriarchal society that women still have a really strong presence.
Mm,
So probably half the businesses, and quite big businesses, are run by women. So it's not a it's patriarchal on the surface. But what do they say in Thailand? If you want something done, you ask the guy. If you really, really want it done, go and ask his wife. she'll she'll get it done. She'll get him to do it.
yes.
So yes, so not so much leadership in that place, because they were still learning the rudimentaries of it. But yeah, we were going to talk about leadership today, weren't we?
Yeah,
With
definitely.
me.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about like how important do you think like leadership is for like organization? So we tend to see like a lot of businesses, they don't have the leaders, they have the bosses. And leaders obviously is
Managers.
important. Yeah,
Yeah.
managers. So leaders is a really important thing. Like how do you like explain like how important is the leadership is?
I'll talk a little bit about how we got to where we are today.
Yeah.
Um, I was doing a training probably 15 years ago in Europe, and was for leaders,
Hmm.
business leaders. And one of the things is, Henry Ford started off the peer group. So it's like he wanted to talk to like-minded people. So he collected all the rich millionaire managers together, and he kicked it
Yeah.
off, Henry Ford, quite a few decades ago. Um, and then sitting there 15 years ago, well, who are the leaders in the world today? And even right now today, I mean, who have we got? Trump, um, the guy you've got in charge in America now, I can't remember his
Joe
name.
Biden.
Um, exactly. Or in Canada and in England, Boris Johnson. In France, you've got these not really aspiring leaders that could be termed as mentors to people to aspire to. Um, you have people like Nelson Mandela, maybe Napoleon, but they're historical people that have become leaders in their own time at the right time. But
Yeah.
today, living, and it's becoming a big issue, because when I talk to young guys, sort of millennial age,
Hmm.
um, who can they actually aspire to be? Um, it's difficult. A few years ago it was Tiger Woods because yeah, he was a really powerful, strong, um, colored guy that's lead, and then of course he fell off the rails, and it's sort of like, well, okay, he was, but yeah, it's really difficult.
Yeah.
We hold these people, we put them much more on a pedestal, and then of course everybody's human. We're all fallible, and they fall off. So the whole concept of leadership, I think, has changed, and that's sort of historical. Today we've gone through we've gone through in humanity's period this evolution of economic evolution. So that fourth the first four stages. That first stage was living on the land, so hunter gatherer,
Yeah.
very patriarchal because your physical strength was needed, and the guy that was physically the strongest, or the woman, but usually the guy, was the leader. But that was all power, physical force.
Hmm.
The next stage was when we started to sort of get these groups. We sort of didn't want to move around so much, so we sort of started to become dig up the land, become farmers. So an agricultural age, the agrarian age,
Yeah.
and we moved out of the transitioned out of that and into more solid villages and towns and eventually cities where we became more specialized. So in the farm, you had the sort of the farmer or the blacksmith or somebody that had a job related to the farm. We became more specialized as we formed these cities, and that's where we sort of come right through probably till the early 90s,
Mm.
where we became much more specialized. And while this is an economic evolution through those stages, there's also a consciousness evolution. So you had to get more education because your skills are becoming more specialized in the cities. So it meant spending more time at school. When you're a hunter-gatherer or you're working on the farm, the holidays here in the north are in August, which for me being in New Zealand is a bit strange. Why August? But that's because it's the part of the year when the crops are ready to be harvested.
Yeah.
So none of the kids would turn up for school. They'd all be harvesting the crops. Now, I don't know about America, but here in England, most kids think that milk comes out of a cardboard box. There's no association between the farm animal and what they're putting on their
Mm.
cereal in the morning. But even at that stage, so that's that sort of industrial age. You sort of became a leader because you had the morals, but you also the morals, the ethics, but the education. So you put yourself up there as somebody that had the education,
Yeah.
like Henry Ford. So not everybody, you still had to have the morals, the ethics, the education. Prior to that, it was tended to be Napoleon and guys that were still using force, power. They were in charge of the armies and the navies and the air force, not so much the air force, but the armies and the navies.
Yeah.
But what's happened recently, and it's been accelerated, I think, a lot with COVID. We've moved into the information age. So when Bill Gates and Paul Allen formed uh, Windows 95, they changed the computer world tremendously. But also what they did, they changed our access to information.
Yeah.
I could be working on a topic in the States, and I could be talking to someone in Taiwan, and I could actually communicate with them, and we could actually learn off each other. That's how Windows 95 started it, to the sharing of information. COVID's come along. For all the damage it did, there's been some real silver lining in it because now I have access to pretty much everything. There is a huge overload of knowledge today.
Yeah.
And I can go on Zoom and I can be talking to, I have peer groups Mondays and Fridays, and I talk to people in Australia, um, India, America, France, in England, all at the same time. We're all talking about similar products. So this
Yeah.
evolution of knowledge has really accelerated, but it's the sharing of knowledge because knowledge isn't power.
Mm.
It's the application of the knowledge that's the power.
Yeah.
When we're talking about leadership here or management, the problem is this is happening really, really fast now. This massive change of this economic group, the information age, and therefore the consciousness awareness that's happening is going to happen within our generation. They're talking now about spiritual cities, cities that are communities, cities that are built up
Yeah.
around a spiritual understanding, not a physical. we have all the banks in London. The problem with leadership is the managers are not keeping up with the changes.
Mm.
When I grew up, when my parents, they got a job and they got a gold handshake because they'd been with the company for 50 years. My generation, we moved around a bit, but you usually stay with a company for 20 years. I'd be a dentist and that was it for life.
Yeah.
Now, millennials, that younger generation, and I have a lot of respect for them. They've gone, well, shit, look at my mum and dad. They worked their asses off. I never saw them. For what? I don't want that.
It's true.
So if you're a manager at a company and you need to employ people at the lower end, sort of bring interns into the company, you've got to be able to deal with where they are, because they're no longer going to put up with bowing and scraping and you're the boss and I'll do what you say. It's like, no, I want my life as, I'll work for you, but what else can I get that's going to support my well-being?
Yeah.
And now we have this great reset going on, and so much of the population changing jobs because that younger generation is just not, they don't want to put up with what their parents went through, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
Leaders today need to understand and work on that and actually encourage it. If they don't, they end up as the managers, which are fighting it.
Mm.
They're not working with the employees that they've got. And that's where I think we get this difference between leadership and management. Managers, it's changing so fast that most people are not keeping up with it. When I go to the doctors, I have a discussion with the doctor.
Yeah.
So this is what I think it is, and this is what he thinks it is. So we look at the results and we discuss them. A generation ago, the doctor had a white lab coat and he was the authority. Now, this is no longer the case. So
Yeah.
leaders, conscious leaders, are the ones that and it's been around for a while. It's not a new thing. Stephen Covey said, seek first to understand and then be understood. And that's a conscious leader, somebody that's going to shut up, use two ears and one mouth to understand, not listen to what's being said, but understand what's being said.
Right.
And that's a conscious leadership awareness, to a manager, a leader that's actually listening to what's happening around them and is interacting with what's going on. They
Yeah.
can no longer dictate, right? This is what we're going to do. You're in a company, you still have to reach KPIs and figures for the end of the month. There's still an economic reason for the company to be there. But
Okay.
I don't know about America, but in England here at the moment, the fuel companies have made tremendous profits in the last couple of years. France, they've frozen the fuel prices because
Mm.
it's coming into winter, and they're getting worried that people are not going to be able to afford the fuel prices. They're just going through the roof.
Yeah.
So conscious leaders, if they want to succeed, and it's more the younger leaders, I think the more dynamic companies, the more aware companies that are going to be able to change. It's always changing by the week, almost, not quite, but it's changing so fast. If you're an older established company like a bank, say, and it's been established for a long time and they have a hierarchy, and by the time you've been there 40 years, you get to sit in the big seat at the top of the table, that business is going to struggle. People are not going to work for them.
Mm. Yeah.
And I think we're seeing this in education, in government, civil servants.
Yeah.
People are just, why would I want to do that? I can get paid as much or more, or maybe less, working for a company that gives me a better quality of life.
It's true.
So conscious leaders are the ones that are going to be more aware of how, and it starts with themselves. You can't, seeking to understand isn't looking at other people. It's understanding myself, because with my background, I have a worldview. I will see things through my lens.
Yeah.
Well, if that younger generation has moved past my lens, how am so you have to, leaders are people that understand themselves to then understand what's happening around them in the environment.
So how do
And I
you
think
create like a conscious leaders around us? I know we are struggling in the UK because of the conscious leaders.
I think I think it's Western society. It's the same in America, New Zealand, Australia. It's no different. We're seeing it particularly in politics.
Yeah.
What the big question I had for a while was, everyone didn't dislike Trump, but a big chunk of the population voted for him. What's
Yeah.
going on there? And now you've got a leader in place who's sort of like what's his name sort of thing. He's sort of been a non-entity, almost the extreme opposite of Trump. I don't support either camp. I'm just using them as examples.
Yeah.
But consciously, I think what's happened with COVID is that people have been able to sit at home. And I mean, my wife used to, I used to work from home, but my wife used to go into the office, and she'd spend 45 minutes on the bus commuting, 45
Right.
minutes going back. But she could do work from home, and she did it for 18 months. She went into the office sort of like once a month for
Yeah.
half a day, sort of thing. And then the office goes, well, you got to come back in. And she's like, but that costs me an hour and a half every day to sit on a bus, which I don't get paid for,
Yeah.
but I've just done it from home. So what's going on here? Um, and a chunk of that is because the managers don't want to lose control because they have this I need to control thing.
Yeah.
They're uncomfortable in their situation. It's not an easy business to run, having a lot of your workers working
Mm.
remotely. But I think so somebody like my wife, for instance, an hour and a half extra. Now it wasn't an hour and a half extra, she just did more work in that hour and a half, but it gave people a lot more time to think, is this really what I want to do? Do I really want to go back into the office? Had COVID lasted for a couple of weeks, wouldn't have changed much, but it went for
Yeah.
so long that a lot of people go, I just, why do I need to go into, why do I need to go into the office? Why do I need to spend so much time, the stress of traveling, having to drive in, spending all that money on a car that sits in the garage or sits in the
Mm.
car park most of the time, which I pay for. Um, so it's all that, and so I think what's happening, and the second fastest growing industry in the States is life coaching. Tony Robbins, who's one of the top motivational speakers in the world, he just did a live event, 5-day event on Zoom,
Right.
and they had over 900,000 people on that event. I always think it's quite good if I get sort of 20 people, and some of the
Yeah.
courses I do, they get 100 people. He gets 90,000, not just under 1 million people, 900,000. People are spending a couple of hours every day for 5 days listening to what he says. Now, Tony Robbins, if you don't know him, he's a motivational speaker. He started in the 70s and then into the 80s, and he started to become quite big, and he's pretty much saying the same stuff he was saying 15 years ago.
Yeah.
He's got a new box, a new ribbon, but the content's the same content. But the thing now is that more people, they've been at home and they're like, why am I going to do this? Why am I going to go back to the office, the stress, the strain, the office politics, all that, when I could have done this at home? I
Yeah.
have been doing it at home. There's that part they're starting to see. Also, it's like, wow, I have to work. Is this, there's an awful lot of people going, is this really what life's all about? I thought I was out of it. I wasn't doing what my parents did and got stuck in a job for life, and basically it's you're either working for your goals or somebody else's goals. And most people from my generation, from my parents' generation, were working for somebody else's goals.
Yeah.
I mean, the classic example today is Elon Musk can fly to outer space, but his guys working in the Amazon factories are still what do they call it? The way that they work, they get paid minimum wage. They get
Mm.
paid for when the work's available. So they're working just to make ends meet. He's flying, to outer space.
Yeah.
Just as an example, who's working for whose dreams?
Definitely the workers. Yeah.
And an awful lot of those workers are going, is this really what it's about? And I still need to work and I still want to do well in my job, but I need a bit more of a work-life balance here. So
Yeah.
people are looking to people like Tony Robbins. I'm not endorsing Tony Robbins, um, but they're looking for people that are that are in the self-development industry. And for me, self-development is really about self-awareness.
Mm.
So I can learn things off Tony Robbins. And the big danger, of course, is, and Tony Robbins has a program or a film, I'm Not Your Guru. An awful lot of people have been brought up with a mindset of the government will fix things, or the NHS will fix things, or somebody else will fix things. Well, that's pretty obvious it hasn't worked. And I think a lot of people are going, I have to take responsibility. I have to become more self-aware of what's happening around me. So rather than be reactive to what's happening outside me, actually notice what's happening inside me and become a bit proactive. Is this stressful, this job? Do I really not like driving into work? Maybe I'll need to look at changing.
Sure.
Or do I need to I worked one of the many consulting jobs I do is with something called predictive index, and they have a great strapline. We employ people on their qualifications, and we fire them because of their attitude.
Mm,
And when you go to a job, you really, it's a two-way interview. You need to get a sense of, can I work with these people? Do they put the right vibes out?
yeah,
Do I think I'll feel comfortable? And I think people are getting more into that self-awareness. I'm not, it's killing me going into work every day. And in stress, I mean, 60-70% of problems in hospitals now are lifestyle diseases. And well, that's drinking and overeating and eating rubbish food. It's also the stress of living.
yeah,
And the stress of living, it's not like it all comes at once. It's that little wee bit every day, that little bit of stress driving into work. Now, stress produces adrenaline, and the adrenaline, if it's not helping us run away from a tiger, as we did back in the old days when we were hunter-gatherers, if it's not helping me run fast, it's starting to break down my organs inside. It's
yeah,
not, adrenaline is not good for us if it sits there. Now, day to day, it's insignificant, but day plus day, plus the next day, plus the next week, plus 5 years, plus 10 years, it's no wonder that people have these lifestyle diseases because they're living uneasily. And all these things sort of come together, and that's I think what people are looking at. They're not happy with what's going on.
definitely.
Conscious leaders are the ones that recognize this. They're self-aware enough of themselves to recognize, okay, this way of doing things isn't working. Let's listen to what they're saying. But you've got to ask the right questions as well. You don't just listen for the sake of listening. You've got to be able to ask the right questions. So conscious leadership is, for me, well, if we do it on conscious levels, I think conscious leadership is a 3 me level.
Mm,
Most of the world, a lot of the world lives at a conscious level of 2 me. The world's happening to me. I can't do anything about it. Taxes have gone up. It's just being pushed on me. And that's a stressful situation to live in. I can't change anything. I'll just try and get week to week, earn some money, pay the bills, pay the rent, that sort of thing. And we just basically lie back and let life happen to me.
yeah,
And it's a way of thinking. People get stuck in that.
yeah, totally agree, John. So yeah, we're coming to end of this podcast, John. So yeah, we can go on for
Already,
hours.
God.
I know I can feel the passion about it. So yeah, I really appreciate your
I
time.
think I'll just quickly say, but the next part of this, so 1 minute, the next part of this, people, they don't want to be reactive to the world. So they move into this by me level of consciousness. Now, a big chunk of the population is in by me. So I will step out there and I'll force life to bend life to what I want. Awful lot of